Thank you so much for inviting me to speak to the Old Fliers group today. It's wonderful to be here. As Steve mentioned, my background's in zoology. I was a zoologist before I was a pilot, and I've recently flown around Australia in the Microlight aircraft to raise awareness for migratory shorebirds. And before I get into my talk about how that adventure came to be, I'd just like to start by sharing a short video with you. Curlews, sandpipers, red-necked stints. These are migratory shorebirds, but some people call them moonbirds, because in their lifetime they will fly the distance from the earth to the moon and back again. Great southern land. 36 species of shorebirds visit Australia every year as they make their epic migratory journey from the north. My name is Amelia Formby, and migratory shorebirds are my inspiration. Like them, I too am obsessed with flying. But despite how amazing I think they are, they're among the most endangered animals in the world, because the wetlands they rely on across the East Asian Australasian flyway are being So this is my project. It's called Wing Threads Flight Around Oz, and this is my aircraft. It's a Microlight, and it's a type of powered hang glider. It's manufactured by a company called Airborne, which is based in Newcastle. Unfortunately, they just closed down business because of COVID. But the reason I chose a Microlight to undertake this adventure is because I wanted to experience what it's like to be a bird. The Microlight has an open cockpit, so I'm exposed to the elements like a bird is, and it's also physical to fly, just like flapping your wings would be. It's controlled by what we call weight shift. So I'm holding on to that triangular control frame that's directly connected to the wing, and the trike base underneath is like a pendulum that swings side to side as you push the wing either left or right or forwards or back to steer. And it cruises at a similar speed to what the birds do on migration as well. So I cruise around at about 55 knots, and we have records of shorebirds, well that's about 100 kilometres an hour. We have records of shorebirds flying at about 80 kilometres an hour on migration, which is incredibly fast for a bird. So these are the birds that inspired my adventure. They're called migratory shorebirds, and we have about 36 species of migratory shorebirds that come to Australia each year. They have fabulous names, like we've got a whimbrel down in the bottom right hand corner there, and curlew sandpiper up the top, eastern curlew. We've got godwits and dowitches. I don't know who comes up with these names, but they're fabulous. And these birds all fly to the Arctic to breed every year. It's a 25,000 kilometre round trip, and they follow a bird migration highway called the East Asian Australasian Flyway. This animation gives you a bit of an idea about where they're coming from. So they're breeding up in the Arctic Circle and following this migration path back down to Australia each year. This is where most of them stop, around the Yellow Sea in China and Korea. It's one of the major stopover sites on the way, and then they make their way down through Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, Borneo, Thailand, back to Australia and New Zealand. And the smallest bird to do this journey is called the red-necked stint. And it's a very tiny bird, it's about this big, he weighs about as much as a Tim Tam. And this little bird can fly 5,000 kilometres without stopping. Now that's all the way across Australia and 1,000 kilometres out to sea. But even more impressive is this bird, the bar-tailed godwit. And the bar-tailed godwit is the world record holder for the longest non-stop flight of any bird species. And all these illustrations that I'm showing you, by the way, are my own from my children's book, which is called A Shorebird Flying Adventure. So there's a very famous bar-tailed godwit, and her name is E7, and she was fitted with a satellite tracker by scientists in New Zealand back in 2007, so they could see where she was flying in real time on migration. And she blew everyone away when she flew all the way from Alaska up in the United States directly back to New Zealand across the Pacific Ocean. Now that's a 12,000 kilometre flight, and what makes that even more incredible is that these birds can't land on water. So if they land on water, they drown. And they're not gliding on thermals like pelicans and ibis, they flap their wings the entire way. And this bird did this 12,000 kilometre flight in just 9 days. So that is an average of 60 kilometres an hour. So the way these birds do these incredible journeys is by taking binge eating to the next level. So they eat all sorts of invertebrates that are buried in the sand and the mud, shellfish, crabs, worms, pippies, that sort of thing. And some of them will almost double their body weight in size. This animation shows shorebirds in large flocks on mud flats throughout Asia and Australia, and they just gorge themselves. They'll get really, really fat before they go. And you can see they co-occur, the species occur together, and they often have this stitching, feeding pattern. They're like a little sewing machine. They actually have pressure sensors in their bill that's a bit like bat echolocation, so they can detect differences in pressure in the mud and work out where different invertebrates are as they're feeding. Incredible birds. So here's an example of a bird called a red knot when it's on the skinny side after migration. And this is also a red knot just before it goes. So you can see they look like they've almost swallowed a tennis ball or something like that. They get really big. So they're using those fat reserves that they put on as energy for fuel, and they will lose all of that weight on those long flights. And you probably noticed this second bird's a bit more orange than the first as well. So they also change their plumage before they go. So when they're here in Australia, which is between September through to March, we call that their non-breeding season. They're mostly grey and brown and white. And then they'll go this beautiful red coloration for the breeding season. And the reason for that is because up in the Arctic tundra, there's no trees and it's light 24 hours a day. And these birds rely on camouflage because they're nesting on the ground, and it protects them from predators like owls and foxes and falcons. So here's an example of a bar-tailed godwit sitting on eggs, and you can see how effective that camouflage is when they're sitting amongst all those mosses and lichens. And this is a shorebird nest. It's a ruddy turnstone nest, and you can see it's not a typical nest either. We actually call it a scrape. And the bird makes the scrape by wiggling their belly against the ground to make a small depression, and they'll just lay their eggs on the ground. So the reason they go up to the Arctic to breed is because in the summertime all the ice thaws out and melts, and you get these large areas of open water and flat landscapes, and you also get these huge mosquito blooms at the same time. So when the shorebird chicks are born, they're what we call precocial, which means they can run around and feed themselves. They already have feathers and don't rely on mum and dad to bring them food. So there's all these mosquitoes and other insects for the birds to eat. Here's our little Tim Tam bird, the red-necked stint, with 3 chicks, and you can see they're incredibly camouflaged as well. Now this little chick, when it's only 6 weeks of age, will have fledged and grown its own adult feathers and can fly. And at that point, its parents will actually leave it behind and fly back to Australia. And it will stay in the Arctic for another couple of weeks before it will do its first ever migration by itself. So how it knows the way back to Australia is one of the mysteries of shorebird migration. But what we do know is that shorebirds live for a very long time. We've got banding records of shorebirds that are over 30 years old. So what that means is that by the time a shorebird is 18, it will have flown a distance that's equivalent to if it had have flown from Earth all the way to the moon, just by flying to the Arctic and back every year on migration. So if you think of that little Tim Tam bird, our redneck stint, it's going to fly over 384,000 kilometres in its lifetime, which is pretty amazing. But you may recall from the video that many of our shorebird species are in decline. There's 8 that are listed as endangered or critically endangered, and the main reason for that is habitat loss. So wetlands are often reclaimed for development, whether that be housing or industry or farming. And when there's fewer wetlands for the birds to stop at to rest and refuel, it means that fewer birds are able to make those epic migrations. And I mentioned before that the Yellow Sea was one of those major stopovers. So around China and Korea, 65% of those mudflats in the Yellow Sea have been reclaimed just in the last 3 decades. And in that time, we've seen up to 80% decline in population in species like eastern curlew and curlew sandpiper. So those are huge crashes in birds that rely most heavily on this area as a place to stop. This animation just shows through Google Maps how those areas have been built up. So the mudflats have been reclaimed to build industrial ports mostly. But thankfully, the Chinese government has declared the Yellow Sea a World Heritage listed site, and the development of ports is now banned in those areas, so what is left will be protected. So this is why I love the story of shorebird migration, because it really demonstrates how we're all connected through these ecological networks across 23 countries in our East Asian Australasian flyway, which is home to over half of the world's population. Over 4.5 billion people live in our flyway alone. And those wetlands are really like a chain with links in it. So it really highlights how looking after our wetlands here at home can have that impact on an international scale. And that was really the message that I wanted to share in doing this flight. So before I became a scientist, I was actually an artist, and that's where I first became introduced to migratory shorebirds when I was working as a tapestry weaver, of all things, at the Australian Tapestry Workshop in South Melbourne. And I did an arts degree in Melbourne before I did science. And I was working with a fellow artist by the name of John Wolseley, who had done a beautiful mural that was commissioned by the City of Melbourne about migratory shorebirds, and I was invited along to the unveiling. And I had never heard of shorebirds at the time, even though I'd been into birds since I was a kid. And I was really taken by these migration stories of godwits and curlews and whatnot flying to the Arctic and back, and also equally saddened to hear that many of them were in decline. So I began volunteering for the Victorian Wader Studies group in Melbourne and started banding and flagging shorebirds around the coast. And I was studying part-time and working part-time. I was studying zoology at the time, and when I finished my degree I moved to Perth for work. I got a job at UWA, and I began banding and flagging shorebirds up in northwest Western Australia as well. And it was through this experience that I really began to see that one of the major issues for shorebird conservationists was getting the message out there about the birds being in decline and the importance of protecting their wetland habitats. So I was really racking my brain as to what we could do to address that problem. And I was talking to a mate at UWA who was telling me that his brother flew a Microlight, and that it was pretty easy to learn to fly and cheap to get your recreational pilot certificate as well. So the next day I was driving to work, and I had this idea just pop in my head out of nowhere. Oh, I could learn to fly a Microlight and follow the shorebirds on migration to Siberia, as you do. And when the idea hit me, it really took my breath away. It made me speechless. I was like, oh gosh, I can actually do this if I decide to. So I had no history of aviation in my family. I had no dreams of becoming a pilot before this idea came to me. So I thought, well, a good place to start would be, seeing if I actually like flying. So I booked a TIFF out at Sky Sports Flying School in York, out in WA, at a place called White Gum Farm, which some of you are probably familiar with Gordon Marshall. And I got the flying bug really hard. I loved it. I thought it was the best thing ever. So it took me about a year to go solo, and I got my NAV and passenger endorsements and all that as well, thanks to an Amelia Earhart Fly Now scholarship through the 99s. And then I just had the issue of getting my own aircraft. So Gordon had just bought a gyrocopter, and Russell Duncan from Airborne Australia, who manufactured the Microlights, had come over to White Gum to help him put it together. And he told Russell of my plans to fly to Siberia in a Microlight and said, you should get Millie over to the Airborne factory in Newcastle to work in the factory and get some experience. And Russell said yes. So in September of 2017, so I got my pilot certificate and went solo and everything in 2017. So in late 2017, I went over to Newcastle and did some flight training with Russell's son, Rory. And I told Rory I wanted to learn to fly in turbulence. That was probably a mistake. So this is me learning to fly, land in turbulence in the Microlight. And Lake Macquarie is a great place to do that because it's always turbulent at Lake Macquarie. So after this experience, Airborne agreed to sponsor me. They let me fly their aircraft for free around the Hunter Valley and Newcastle while I got the money together for my own aircraft, which is incredibly generous. And while there, I also worked in the factory. So I ended up, to take on this opportunity, I ended up selling all my belongings in Perth. I packed up my car, I drove to Newcastle at the beginning of 2018 and worked in the factory. And while I was there, I got sponsorship from Peel Harvey Catchment Council in Mandurah. I scrapped together about 18,000 from a crowdfunding campaign, and Dick Smith threw some money in as well. Airborne allowed me to build my own aircraft at cost, so they made no profit from it. And I used my hours working in the factory as credit towards the aircraft. Here's a time lapse of the aircraft being built. So this is a factory in Redhead, and for those wanting to know, it is a Rotax 912 80 horsepower engine on the Microlight. The base, the fiberglass, is a fiberglass pod. All the struts and everything is aluminium. So it was just wonderful having this experience of being able to put the aircraft together with the help of the boys in the factory and have that knowledge of it. So this is the wing, which is separate, and you can actually take the wing off and fold it up like a hang glider wing, because it is a hang glider wing. And that's it finished there. So that's my first solo flight in my own Microlight, which was a real dream come true. It felt pretty amazing to get to that point. It was really awesome. So I thought, okay, I've got my own aircraft. Before I try and do some kind of international flight, I'll do a flight around Australia. And before I wanted to fly around Australia, I wanted to do a recce trip. And I thought, I'll drive the Microlight around Australia and set it up and go flying at a lot of different places, get experience, and drum up some support for my project. So I set off with my mate Phil. That's the car all set up there. So that blue package on top of the car, that's the Microlight wing all folded up, and the trike base can just go in the trailer. Well, we left Newcastle in August of 2018, and my first stop was Caboolture, and I was catching up with the ops manager, Neil Schaefer from RAOs, who's also a trike pilot, and we were going to go flying together. So I got to Caboolture, caught up with Neil, we got the trike out and set it up, and I said, I'll just shift the trailer out of the way before we go, and I didn't realise that the jockey wheel on the trailer was not pinned in. And as I shifted the trailer, the wheel collapsed and fell on my leg, and I broke my leg. So I was 3 days into my amazing adventure. I'd done 0 flying and had a broken leg. And the reason I'm smiling in that photo is because I'm high as a kite. But me being very stubborn, I decided to keep travelling around Australia because we had a couple of fundraising opportunities lined up. It was one in Darwin, one in Broome, and another back in Perth. So we went ahead and did those. Turned out to be a big flop. Didn't really make any money. If anything, we just broke even. So we got back to Perth in September, about 6 weeks later. No, it was 9 weeks later. Yep. And I said, look, I'll just recover here in Perth from my broken leg, and then we'll decide what to do next. And while I was staying at my mate Phil's place, I slipped in the bathroom getting my crutches, and I broke my wrist as well. So it wasn't a great start. So I really felt like my dreams were all falling apart around me, but I was still going, I'll still do the flight around Australia in 2019, it'll be all right. But a week after I broke my wrist, my flying instructor died as well, Gordon. And it was just too much. He'd become a close friend. So I really felt the universe was telling me it wasn't the right time. So I decided I actually moved back to Lake Macquarie after that, at the beginning of 2019, to find my feet. I worked for the skydive people at Lake Macquarie Airport. I worked for Matt Hall for a bit as well, which was really fun. And then I got a job with BirdLife Australia over there. And I thought, I'll do the flight around Australia in 2020. But you all know what happened then. But in 2019, I gave a talk about wing threads at the Australian Ornithological Conference in Darwin. And the CSIRO publishing representative was there, and afterwards she came and approached me and said, would you like to do a children's book about your project? We want more female role models in STEM in our catalogue. So of course I said yes, and I asked if I could illustrate it. And that book is called A Shorebirds Flying Adventure. I've got a copy here if anybody wants to take a look. That came out last year. So it worked out really well because the whole point of doing this adventure was education and getting the word out about shorebirds. It was really using aviation as a tool to capture people's attention to then be able to talk about the birds that inspired the adventure. So I had my book and I had an aircraft. Next thing I needed was to raise the money to be able to do the flight around Australia. So at the start of last year, I ran a crowdfunding campaign, and to give it a bit of a boost, I invited this guy to come flying with me, the wonderful Costa. And he said yes. His dad was actually a pilot, so he grew up flying around Bankstown and Sydney with his dad in the Cessna. So he's actually quite the aviation enthusiast, which I was pleased to learn. So I took Costa for a flight in the Microlight around Lake Macquarie, and we live streamed it to Facebook. And thanks to Costa's help, we ended up raising just under $78,000 for my trip, which was awesome. So in May of last year, I packed the Microlight up again. I wanted to start at White Gum Farm because that's really where this adventure all began for me, and had sentimental value, meaning for me to start there as well. So I drove the Microlight back across to Perth to begin my adventure. And that was in June of last year. So the aim was to go all the way around. I thought it would take me 6 months, but it ended up taking me much, much longer than that. And it's not quite 20,000. I don't know where I got that figure from. It ended up being more like 14,000. But I'll pause here and I'll show you a video I've put together that is all of the flight legs put together. So I'll play that for you now. So this is me taking off last year from White Gum, and I went anti-clockwise and landed at Narracot with Colin down there, and heading around to Bremer Bay in Albany. So beautiful flying around there at that time of year because it was whale migration season. So I had so many whales, including a southern right whale calf that was pretty specky. And of course, flying around Esperance there was beautiful. Crossing the Nullarbor was one of the highlights as well. This is me taking off from Kaiguna. And I've got an Insta360 camera there on the Microlight, just in case you're wondering. I landed at Eucla, and the wind meant we got stuck there for a week, and myself and my friend Keith made friends with the owners of the Roadhouse, who were those people in that photo. We worked in the Roadhouse for a week in exchange for our room. That was quite fun. And here's the Bunda Cliffs. I've got to say that's still probably one of the biggest highlights of the trip. That's taking off at Nullarbor Roadhouse over the golf course and flying over the head of the Bight. And this was the flight down to Kurubi Farm along the coast and landing at Kurubi. That coastline around South Australia is beyond beautiful, so underrated. It was stunning. Landing at Ceduna. Oh, and then at Streaky Bay, I had to pack the Microlight up. The thing about the Microlight, you can't really leave it out in the open if there's no hanger. I had a lot of people like Rod Riddle here who offered me hangarage on the way, and that's Gavin Myers' trike in the background there. A lot of trike pilots joined me on my trip as well at different points. A lot of canola crops at that time of year too. So this is around September last year. And flying around the Coorong in South Australia. And around to Robe as well, that's flying past the obelisk. And my friend Gavin there, this is the 12 Apostles in Victoria. And when I got to Barwon Heads, I connected with the comedian Sammy J, that's Sammy J there from Melbourne. And I took Sammy J on my flight leg with me from Barwon Heads to Tayab, so it was a great way to promote the flight. And Tayab in Victoria, it's Western Port Bay, and then flying up to Bairnsdale from Latrobe Valley. More truck pilots joining me. And then Gippsland Lakes there underneath. And Merimbula. The aviation community on this trip has just been amazing. So many supportive people in our community. This is flying up the Sapphire Coast to Wollongong. And that's flying along Victor 1 past Sydney Harbour. I've got to say that is one of the most butt-clenching flights I've ever done. You have to wear a life jacket and everything, and a couple of miles off the coast at 500 feet for 30 miles over water. It was a bit nerve-wracking for me. And then up to South Grafton, I had Peter and Kerry Clements there at South Grafton look after me. And then flying up to Ballina with Kerry and that. I had a Qantas Jetstar flight have to give way to me. Which was really funny. That was the Gold Coast. So I do have a transponder on my aircraft, so I was flying through controlled airspace up the coast through Coffs Harbour and past Gold Coast and all of that. This is Fraser Island, and then going up to Rockhampton. I didn't land at Rocky, I actually landed at a nearby airstrip called Headlow, and these are all the volcanic plugs near Headlow Airfield. And then up to Mackay. The Queensland coastline is also beautiful. This is landing at a place called Donington Air Park, just outside of Townsville. I ended up getting stuck at Townsville for nearly a month. This is a Hinchinbrook Channel on the way to Innisfail. And then the next one, this is going up to Atherton Airfield past Mount Bartle Frere, which is the tallest mountain in Queensland. That's me at Atherton. Another trike pilot up there, Jack Cross, looked after me. And then I cut across the base of the Cape straight to Georgetown. This is landing at Normanton on the edge of the Gulf there. That was really beautiful, so pretty. Oh, and then I'm celiac, and it was really hard to get food without gluten in Northern Australia. I got sick in Normanton because of gluten myself and had to drive to Mount Isa, and then we set the trike up again at Mount Isa and kept going. That was Camberwheel. and across to Barclay Homestead. So I was flying IFR through this area. I follow roads. And yeah, went to Tennant Creek and then up north through Catherine. So landed at Elliot and was planning to just stay there overnight, but the next day the wind had picked right up and I ended up getting stuck there for a week in the middle of nowhere. This is going to Daly Waters. Daly Waters is one interesting town, and the airstrip there is a huge World War II airstrip. And then we went to Mataranka. Oh, and when I got to Darwin, my car had blown a head gasket and my mate Keith had to come and rescue me in his Navara. So that's my mate Keith who ground crewed for me across the Nullarbor. So we're back together again and he got me home. So this is flying to Catherine. I didn't land at Tyndall, I landed at a private airstrip called Wally's just outside. So this is taking off at Wally's airstrip. He was a local veterinarian. And Timber Creek, and then across to Kununurra. My camera wasn't working for that part of the trip. And then when I got, this is Roebuck Bay in Broome, which is so beautiful. I love red dirt. I've got a thing for red dirt. And Roebuck Bay is one of the most magical places. So that's the Roebuck Plains in the background there and the extensive mudflats. And that's also the #1 place for migratory shorebirds in Australia. That was at Anna Plains Station. They corralled my aircraft for me so the cows wouldn't lick it. This is 80 Mile Beach. And this is Port Hedland, taking off from Port Hedland on my way to Karratha. So I landed at Karratha and then kept going on to Onslow. And then Onslow to Exmouth. Oh, that whole part of WA is absolutely stunning, and there was just manta rays and whales and turtles, hundreds of turtles coming up on the beach. This is my mate Gavin Penfold who runs Bird's Eye View Ningaloo Microlights up at Exmouth. They flew with me and got that amazing photo of us together. It was a very smoky morning. I flew to Carnarvon and then down to Kalbarri, Jurien Bay. And then back to White Gum Farm. So this is last Wednesday morning on the 20th. This is me arriving overhead at White Gum Farm. Landing. Yeah, victory. It was a good feeling. That was my friend Mary welcoming me home. So that's my summation of that adventure. It was pretty epic, to say the least. I haven't, it's very hard to sum up, what actually ended up taking me just over a year. So I ended up making it to Newcastle by December last year, and then I had 4 months off in Newcastle, and I just worked for BirdLife during that time. My dad was unwell and he passed away during that time, which was quite sad, so I had some time off, and then I got back on the wagon in March of this year and finished the flight. So it took me, in the end, 12 months to do what a godwit can do in 9 days. So, as I mentioned, I work for BirdLife Australia as part of their migratory shorebird team, and one of the things we have is called a conservation action plan. We outline actions that need to happen to help shorebird conservation, and some of the things around education, creating educational products, engaging community to foster wetland stewardship, and also developing education campaign strategies. So these were the targets I was really aiming to do when I took off on this project, and I saw primary schools as being an ideal way to get the message out, because the children's book I have is aimed at mid-primary kids aged 9 and 10, so I was focusing on grades 3 to 6. On this trip I ended up doing it in 59 flight legs. It was just over 14,000 kilometres, and on the way I visited over 100 schools, 105 schools in total. and reached just over 6,500 students on the way. So the kids love the Microlight. They really engaged with that aviation side of this project. They're fascinated by this aircraft and they ask really funny questions. But I don't know why, I always got asked, how do you eat while you're flying? How do you eat while you're flying, and what happens if the engine stops, you know, these kinds of things. But they love the Microlight, and that was really a doorway to then being able to talk about the birds that inspired it, and I used my illustrations from the book to do that, and also show them how to draw shorebirds, because it's a great way to learn bird ID. You look at the same features to draw a bird as what you would to ID it, and when you draw something you create a body memory, so you're much more likely to remember the ID features that you've just learned than if someone just shows you a photo and describes it. And the end of my sessions with the kids, this is always my favourite bit, when they hold up their pictures and show me their beautiful artworks. They're so cute. So I show them how to draw a redneck stint, that Tim Tam bird, and the bar-tailed godwit, because it's really my goal, you know, that if to make those two species household names, you know, like pandas and orangutans and koalas, let's have redneck stints and bar-tailed godwits as household names as well. And for people to see their wetland habitats as worthy of protection and valued. So these are some of their drawings. I love that one at the top. It's really fat. I think that one's about to migrate. And it's really heartening when you get back writing exercises from teachers, like this one in the top corner, and it says, I love Millie visiting us, I love shorebirds. Shorebirds fly 12,000 kilometres a year. So, you know, they're really taking that information in. One of the other exciting things that happened during this project was the creation of a documentary film. So I've been working with my friends from Remember the Wild, which is a Nature Connection charity in Melbourne, and we got funding together to create a short 10-minute documentary called Wing Threads, and you can watch that on ABC iView now, alongside 10 other short docos that were also successful as part of the Your Planet initiative. So you can jump on ABC iView and watch that when you get home. So that's really it from me. Thank you so much for inviting me to share the Wing Threads adventure with you today. I really appreciate it, and yeah, feel free to jump on my website or follow along on social media. So thanks again for your time. Yeah.